Hey guys, good morning. So we've been building on wet into wet techniques. I'm going to do another practical demonstration today. We're going to draw an eye and then use some blending techniques within it so you guys can kind of see how I do it when I paint Cara pages. So the first step, of course, is to draw an eye. Alright, so now that that's painted, I'm going to grab one of my large brushes and we're going to go for some really unbelievable colors. So we're going to start with Hunter Green and then we're going to go into Opera Rose. And for the purposes of this little demonstration, I'm not going to do a whole lot of underpainting. Here's the top. And usually I utilize this technique or wet into wet blending techniques with Naomi, who has hazel eyes. So I will go from Winsor Newton Green Gold to Marine Blue. Let me zoom in so you guys can see it's already mixing. And I am using super cheap paper on this one. I am using Canson's bulk watercolor paper. You're going to have a lot better results if you use a cotton rag watercolor paper. I'm going to lift up some of the excess paint so you guys can refer to the Thirsty Brush tutorial if you don't know how to do that. And then I'm going to let this dry. Alright, so those layers have dried. You can see they're a little bit muddy. In fact, I'll zoom in again so you guys can see much better. And we get an interesting sort of bloom effect as well as a transition. So the next step is going to be to sort of tighten those colors up and intensify them in certain areas. So I'm going in again with the Hunter Green, and there's loads of ways you can handle doing wet into wet techniques on an eye. Loads of different areas you can accent and different stages you can opt to accent at. Grabbing the Opera Rose again. It doesn't all have to be at the same stage. In fact, I recommend playing around, and I may demonstrate some other ways I've done it in the past. Okay, and then I'm going to grab some really dark red, some Naphtha Maroon, and I'm going to dot it here in the middle, and it's already pushing that green out of the way and kind of taking over the Opera Rose as well. Gonna go in, absorb some of that extra watercolor. We're not trying to blend it too much, just want to soak it up so there's not so much water on the page. And then I'm gonna let this dry as well. Alright, and while that's still a little wet, I'm gonna grab some more Opera Pink mixed in with some of that Naphtha Maroon. And again, we're really just sort of playing and seeing what will work. And I should have left it as just a rim at the bottom. Unfortunately, this is just taking forever to dry. It's a lot of paint on a lot of cheap paper, so it's basically just going to have to evaporate. So we're going to do a slightly more realistic demonstration. And to do that, we're going to start again with the eye as a sketch. And I'll also demonstrate some shading techniques since I already demonstrated basic blending. And this isn't an eye drawing tutorial. I'm just drawing kind of a basic, somewhat realistic eye for my style, which would be more oval and horizontal than tall. Should have done it in the middle of the page. Okay, so we've got our basic eye, and I've got a cup of clean water. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little bit of skin tone using my mat, or a skin tone using my mat, so I can demonstrate that. And I have loads of videos where I not only paint in my sort of cartoony style, but I also do more realistic demonstrations. So if that is something you're interested in, you should check out some of my other watercolor tutorials. I just mixed a little bit of scarlet with some yellow ochre. Can also do a basic tutorial on the shading zones of the face if that is something that sounds interesting. Okay, so we've got our first layer. Time to absorb the excess color, soften that out a bit, and give that a chance to dry. And as you can see, it's already curling a bit. That is always a case to work with heavier paper or to secure your paper down. Alright, so this isn't entirely dry, but it is dry enough. I'm going to move on down to a smaller brush. Grab some more of that color. Trying to mix a little bit of scarlet red in without it getting too red or too watery. Sometimes it's easier to do that wet into wet. I don't want to do it too much because it's kind of push the color out. Alright, let that dry. I may need to remix my skin tone, so I'll just go ahead and get that started. And then also blend out the eye a little bit. And grab a little bit of pink, so a little bit of alizarin crimson. And give that a chance to dry as well. Alright, so not entirely dry, but cool to the touch, slightly more saturated, yellow ochre, almost an orange. A good little mini tutorial of how I layer my colors also, though I have a more in-depth one for that coming up soon. Grab a little bit of Payne's Gray. And switch back to the alizarin crimson. Alright, so this has had a chance to dry. I'm going to add a little Payne's Gray shadow. Now normally, if I'm painting cartoony, I will use a little bit of like red violet or red violet mix. And then I'm going to take the same Payne's Gray mixture, and this is a little darker than I would have liked. I'm going to put it on the eye, and then with some clean water, I'm going to blend it out a little bit. And ideally, we should also be painting into the lashes, because we're going to have to paint those eventually anyway. And then give that a chance to dry. Before I do that, I'll zoom in so you guys can kind of see what we've got. Alright, so I am going to grab a little bit more scarlet. Warm that up. And I think I'm about done with that. Go in with the Payne's Gray. And hit the top like that. And then go in with the alizarin crimson. Get the cornea. And in all that time, our watermelon eye finally had a chance to dry. Hopefully I can demonstrate those techniques in a little more appealing manner here on our eye 2.0. So this time I want to work with what's going to end up being more natural colors. So I'm going to do kind of a honey gold eye. We're going to start with a yellow ochre. Do a bit of our wet into wet blending with some other sort of darker yellow colors, other yellow ochres, some quin golds, while this is still wet, so we can get a soft transition. Okay, give that a chance to dry. Alright, so that is mostly dry. Gonna go ahead and keep working to develop that color, kind of moving on over into browns, because if you're doing sort of a honey colored eye, there's going to be brown lowlights, and having those brown lowlights will sort of help the eye pop a little bit more. Usually I like to go around the center of the eye and also do a cast shadow at the top of the eye, and then hint at the iris. Maybe blend it out a little bit. Maybe blend these lines out a little bit. And let's see, there's some parts of the lid that I'm not super happy about just because they're a little loose. So I'm going to grab some more of that Payne's Gray and kind of tighten them up just a little bit. There we go. And of course, it's another stage where we have to step away a little bit and give it a chance to dry. Alright, so while that has a chance to dry, I'm going to go ahead and get started on the eyebrows. And like with so many things, you want to start lighter than you're going to go. So we're just going to do this in monochrome, and I am using Daniel Smith Quin Gold for this. And for right now, I'm just carefully filling in the eyebrow. And I'll give that a chance to dry, and I'm also grabbing some Van Dyke Brown, which Winsor Newton Van Dyke Brown is kind of like a rich, warm, dark brown, and I'm just gonna boop it down there, boop it up there, maybe do a couple eye freckles, maybe carefully do a line down there. Maybe use little yellow ochre, blend it out a little bit at the top. I have a problem where I want to get too blendy when I'm doing these sort of tutorials. It's like, oh, let me show you all the blendy techniques. But really, restraint is your friend, and restraint is something I often lack. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that beautiful Quin Gold. There we go. And then, of course, I have to let that dry and let the eyebrow dry. And then we can kind of do final touches, tightening things up and adding the eyelashes. Alright guys, that is just about dry and we are just about finished. We just need to, and I actually want to clean this area off because my hand is going to end up resting there. Don't want to pick up a bunch of paint if I can help it. Alright, so we've got some Van Dyke Brown on our brush, and I'm using a natural hair brush here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to squeegee some of the excess paint off. And then letting the brush do most of the work and draw in some fine hairs. Go over it again to kind of tighten it up. I find kind of cleaning up the arch helps with definition and isn't overly distracting. And I often like to do a couple little stray hairs out like that. And then we're going to do, first I'm going to do the lower lash. Then we're going to start doing the upper lashes, or the upper eyelid. Okay. Then I'm gonna do that crease there. All right, so we've got kind of a basic eyelid. I'm gonna tighten up the shadow on the eye. I actually want to go a little darker than that, but first I'm gonna go into that Payne's Gray. A little bit of a sharper crease than I wanted, but I think you guys get the gist. Maybe even mix a little more skin tone. And warm that up a little bit. Or, you know, ruin everything at the last minute, like you do. And then I'm going to grab some sepia and mix it in with my Van Dyke Brown. Do a few hairs in the eyelash or the eyebrow. And I'm trying to hold the paper as flat as I can, touching it as little as possible. Sometimes that is a difficult feat, but I'm just darkening up some of the eyelash. All right, I think we're about done. I apologize if the camera cut off and you missed anything. I think we got all of it. But I have demonstrated 2 ways to paint an eye. One using wholly unrealistic color. The other one slightly more realistic, although still very cartoony. And I'm the sort of person who can never really leave well enough alone, so I wanted to kind of darken the color on the eyelid just a little bit. But there you have it. The eyes have it. We are finished. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you found it useful, helpful, and informative. If you did, please check out some of my other longer tutorials here on this channel in my watercolor playlist. And head on over to natosoup.blogspot.com to check out my Watercolor Basics series. I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope I'll see you during my next tutorial. Bye guys!